Advisory Committee meeting. I'd like to call this to order. We have approval of the minutes.
The reason is that I was there at the last meeting, but my mics didn't get to work. We couldn't connect even with the iPhone, so I was slightly muzzled during that meeting. So I want to get.
Turn on your mic.
I wanted to get these points across because it also impacts, I think, the meeting today. I've got 8 points. I'll try to go through them quickly.
Okay. Just so you know, that the minutes will be approved at the next meeting, just so you know.
Okay. But just in the interest of this meeting and the preparation for next meeting. So 8 points. I'll try to be quick. At the last meeting, my first issue was that we really didn't discuss the bridges. And at the end of the day, the document that Lochmuller is going to produce is going to be the important document for the town to negotiate with the county on what they want in addition to, as a condition to the municipal consent. So what I didn't see, Nate, was an opinion, and maybe that can come later, on one span versus two spans. I think it's important for a whole bunch of reasons. Secondly, if you have a one span 11-lane bridge, is that actually technically feasible, or does that make sense as a whole? Can you evaluate in your VISM or synchro 2 lanes and a breakdown lane with alternative use as a roadway during peak hours of the breakdown lane? And then on the vehicles per hour, a simulation of 3,000 vehicles per hour, which is what we have now. Then if you take the various growth rates, you had 0.56, the county has 1.19, you end up anywhere between 3,500 and 4,000 vehicles per hour. So I think if you have these two milestones, 3,000, 3,500, and 4,000 vehicles per hour, you at least capture the width of the possibilities for the bridges. Then second point, the on-grade bypass option. So not the elevated, but the, I think more and more becomes an important alternative to evaluate. The reason that I'm saying that is because it can be less obtrusive overall, environmentally, less impact on Stony. It can be a quick connection to the Cross Island Parkway. In my book, it makes a lot of sense. It's the lowest cost option as well, and it also cuts the time of the commute for people. So that's on the bypass option. I think needs to be given serious consideration. 3, this was very frustrating when I was sitting there and I couldn't talk. The grading matrix that you've produced, in my book, even though you may have weighted some of the options, is really comparing apples and oranges. You cannot add up these numbers and come to a number and then say, okay, this is 22, this is 21, this is, so we pick this one number. I think that it's relying on that matrix to make a decision would be an embarrassment, not only to Lochmuller, but also to the town. And I want to do this differently. I haven't really thought about how you can compare all these items, but you cannot just add numbers and then come to a conclusion. Number 4, the bike lane. I've mentioned that before. We should do a cost-benefit analysis of the bike lane, its usage, and whether funds for a bike lane cannot be better allocated somewhere else with bike lanes on Hilton Head. I know that there are a lot of bikers, but in reality, if there are 100, 200 bikers, does it really justify doing an additional lane onto these bridges? I'm still, number 5, adaptive traffic management system, and I know that the town has been working very hard to get that to work, but you are still working in clusters, and the 2 clusters at the end of the 278, there's got to be a way that these can be connected during peak hours to create a better flow. In addition, in your synchro VISM modeling, there should be a time element for the Windmill Harbor light, which really stops traffic to let 2 cars through. It doesn't make sense. It'd be good to see what that does if you disable that light, in a sense, during peak hours and enable it beyond that. Number 6, the bow tie alternative. I question whether that actually would work. And again, if you can test that in your simulation models, how many cars does the bow tie actually hold during peak hours? Is it enough? Have you gone into those numbers? And if not, can you do that? And of course, I think that you're going to talk about number 7, elevated bypass, whether what the cost picture is on that, whether it makes sense at all, but most importantly, have we discussed it with DOT as a potential solution, and what is their opinion? If DOT shoots it down for a whole bunch of reasons, it's all nice to think about it, but it's not going to work at that point. The last thing I have is the 425 million, which has been mentioned as a number. We went from 290 million to 425 million, which is a 50% increase. Where does that come from? How is that put together? It's not just a question I have, but I think it's a question for the general public and for, at the end of the day, for people to buy into whatever alternative we come up with. So I think all these points I'd like Lochmuller to consider, take it into account, and where applicable, apply them onto your simulation models. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move into unfinished business, and Sean, I'll let you go ahead and take over.
Thank you, Mayor, Committee, and thank you for all agreeing to meet on late notice after a long Heritage weekend that actually didn't finish till this morning. At the last committee meeting, Lochmuller presented 4 alternatives that they thought were viable to advance for additional evaluation. They did a comparative assessment of those alternatives, and the committee asked for some additional information related to cost, related to property impact, both to public and private lands. And Lochmuller has developed that additional information along with a third bit of information related to construction period based on their professional opinion of the projects at hand. So I'd like to turn it over to Nate and his team. We've also got Brad Strader and Brian Kinzelman on the call here, but turn over to Nate and his team to go through that additional information, answer any questions that the committee had, and make a couple of points that Mr. Advocate made just for clarity, because there's a couple things that Lochmuller it's not within their scope to perform, especially the funding and finding additional funding for this project. And I want to make sure that that's clear at this time.
All right, thank you, Sean. Mayor Perry, members of the committee, thank you all for having us once again. Pleasure to be here. For the Lochmuller team, we have Kate Swinford and Michelle Romine joining us. They're our traffic engineering leads. Chad Costa is our chief environmental engineer. And then Lauren Jackson is also with us, and he's our chief roadway engineer. So we have the subject expertise for any questions you might have as we're going through the presentation. It's a pretty brief agenda. As Sean mentioned, as an action item from the April 10th meeting, you all asked us to put together some information related to the parcels of right-of-way that would go beyond what the Department of Transportation's alternative would require. What you'd asked us to do was delineate between public and private parcels, and we have those numbers for you. We've also prepared high order of magnitude cost estimates as well as estimates for the construction duration. And then we have a matrix at the end of the presentation that has everything incorporated into that. So on the next few slides, this is just more just to remind everybody what the alternatives are. These, with the numbers, as we mentioned before, is not a ranking right now. It's just the order in which we've went through our analyses. Alternative 1 is the SCDOT modified recommended preferred alternative. We assumed the geometry that was within their study west of Cross Island Parkway. However, with our study, the big differentiator is not only taking into consideration our volumes, our timings, our evaluations of the intersections, but we also have included Gumtree Road into our analyses. Alternative 2 are the bow tie options. Those are the dual roundabouts, north and south of Hilton Parkway. The goal of that was to remove the left turns from the main line, therefore effectively turning into two-phase signals, helping intersection operation conditions, as well as providing better pedestrian travel ways, making it a little bit safer, providing refuge islands. And even though it's a little bit more of a circuitous pattern, as the table that we show here in just a little bit, it shows that it improves the overall travel times. Alternative 3 were the echelons and center turn overpasses. These were our options with vertical grade separation at either Squire Pope or Spanish Wells Road. I know Kate has went into these in great detail. I won't belabor them, but effectively trying to, through grade separating, it's creating two-phased signals, again, to help with intersection efficiency and also allowing for pedestrian refuge islands underneath the intersections themselves. And then alternative 4 is the elevated bypass. And what I'd like to do is just take a few moments and just make sure everybody understands maybe the tie-in points and the geometries associated with that. I know we haven't maybe done that quite yet. So there's a few slides that are following. So just so everybody's understanding what we're bringing forth for consideration. The elevated bypass, there would be 2 lanes eastbound and 2 lanes westbound. Those would reside within the inner portions of the corridor. So as you come off of the causeway here from Jenkins Island, the inner 2 lanes would be 2 eastbound lanes that would be elevated. That would continue over the Crazy Crab entrance, continue over Squire Pope Road. Conversely, we would have the 2 inner lanes would be elevated going over these 2 locations, and it would tie back in again prior to the causeway. Throughout the corridor, we would have a single eastbound and a single westbound lane, allowing full access to the intersections themselves. You see this black area, that's just to indicate, I'll show this on another slide, more zoomed in of what the geometry would be. And along the corridor, again, it would be 2 lanes eastbound, 2 lanes westbound in the center of the corridor. Move this down just a little bit. And the next slide will kind of show how everything is going to work at the Cross Island Parkway. But again, single lanes eastbound, single lane westbound, and allowing left turn pockets at all the intersections to maintain that left turn. So this slide really helps. Hopefully everybody can see. I know it's a little bit zoomed out, but I'll just walk through it. So if we're traveling eastbound, as you approach, the motorists would have 3 options. 1, they could exit off here to get back down to Gumtree at grade, or they could remain elevated to go over the new bypass that would go over the existing Cross Island Parkway and travel over Gumtree Road, which I'll show in another slide. Or they could access the existing Cross Island Parkway, ultimately continue south to the south end of the island. Westbound, there would be 2 lanes that would merge into 1 at this location, and then also the existing Cross Island Parkway, as we all know, it merges into 1 at this location. So that would be our 2 lanes that travel westbound. And then at grade from Gumtree Road, as there are existing, we have 2 westbound lanes that come up to Gumtree, and then I'll show a subsequent slide that would continue on, but that first, one of the lanes would drop off at Old Wild Horse. As we approach Gumtree Road, again, we would have at-grade travel lanes similar to what's in place today. The elevated bypass would go over the existing Cross Island Parkway, travel over Gumtree, and then it would tie down west of Wilbourn. The at-grade lanes from Gumtree would come in parallel, and then again, where this ties in west of Wilbourn. From a westbound perspective, we would begin the transition upward west of Wilborn to where the 2 elevated lanes come in this direction, and then the at-grade lanes west of Wilborn going to Gumtree would remain as they are today. This is a zoomed-in view of the Squire Pope Road intersection. Again, the single lane eastbound, single lane westbound. We can have left turn pockets. It shrinks down the intersection. We could have refuge islands right here. And then this provides an interview of what the elevated lanes are. Likewise, at Spanish Wells, similar configuration. Then at Gumtree Road, as I discussed, elevated, and this would tie in west of Wilborn. Elevated lanes westbound, and these would be the at-grade lanes. So I won't, Kate, over the last couple of presentations, we've outlined what the intersection operating conditions would be with each alternative. So I will not go into great detail on this. The reason I wanted to bring this up was, that I don't think we touched on at the last meeting, was when you look at the reductions in travel time, when you compare alternatives 1 through 4, the elevated bypass showing that in the peak condition only being a reduction of 330 seconds. And at face value, that may not seem like a lot more as compared to, even if you look at the echelon option. What I wanted to bring up and emphasize was that these are done using Synchro, sim traffic software. And in this unique configuration, when you have 2 movements, one being elevated and one at grade, all these other ones are essentially at grade. Yes, the echelon may be raising it up, but it's really like one corridor. This option would have essentially 2 running parallel to one another. And so, unfortunately, one of the limitations of Synchro is that it can't model the elevated portion of it. However, should the town and committee desire to pursue more evaluations of alternative 4, BISM would be able to do that. So this would be a more significant reduction if you were to look at the corridor between Moss Creek and Indigo Run.
And Nate, can I ask you a question? This table, so what do you compare it with? This is 2045 no build compared to?
Correct.
Compared to
What the results are for each of the alternatives. So for alternative 1, for example, in the AM and PM peak hour, you can see that
This compared to alternative 1, that's SCDOT.
Our version of the SCDOTs, which again considers our volumes, our timings, but then also the implementation of the improvements at Gumtree Road. Yes. It's in relation to, but the deltas, pluses and minuses, are in relation to what the conditions would be if nothing happens.
Yeah, so the 2045 no build is the base.
Right.
And then they've compared each of these alternatives against the 2045 no build.
Right. So out of that, can you just go back to the table? So out of that table, you gain most of the time by alternative 3, right?
From a throughput standpoint, but
Guard
again,
everything else, but just on these numbers.
from a throughput standpoint, but again, we wanted to highlight that those numbers for alternative 4 will be a greater reduction if you're considering the true elevated from touchdown to touchdown. But as you can see, these are reflective of just an at-grade intersection. So with alternative 4, that's saying that if you were to remain at grade, you would still, the 330 for the westbound and the PM and 126, those significant reductions, those are what's happening at those smaller footprint intersections. So even at the at-grade intersections, there's a significant difference. And on top of that, what we're saying is that overall, you'd see a bigger number for what it'd take for somebody to travel from Moss Creek to Indigo Run, just bypassing everything. So that throughput would be even a greater reduction than that.
Yeah, Nate, if I can chime in for a minute here.
Sure.
I think basically the difference with this, with alternative 4 and why VISM would be needed to get the true understanding is Synchro is there for modeling an intersection. When you raise those lanes, they're no longer in an intersection. So you don't get a gauge of what the delay is on those through lanes because they're not part of the intersection. So this number is for the lanes within the signalized intersection. And if that explains it a little better.
Yep, thank you. You still have the westbound Cross Island Parkway coming down as one lane.
Merging in.
Two.
Correct.
Why is that? Why can't we have two lanes coming down?
On alternative 4, or which alternative?
Alternative 4.
With the 2 westbound lanes that we're beginning west of Wilborn coming in, and then you have the existing Cross Island Parkway that merges into one anyway, then we would just have, that way we have the 2 that would merge in from, coming in from Gumtree Road, and then for the Cross Island, that would merge into the 2. And we've looked at that from, Lauren, that's correct description of the geometry, correct?
Yeah, we could do more, but at some point you need to get down the 2. And our modeling is showing that if that traffic's not approaching that intersection and going through that intersection, you don't need to. Part of the issue with it currently is that traffic is merging together and then they're also getting stopped at the intersection. If it's a through free movement, the situation changes and you don't have as much of an issue with the merge. But yeah, it could be, that could be expanded to be two lanes, and then at some point beyond that merge, you would then go down from 3 lanes to 2 lanes.
If you don't have an overpass, then you merge those 2 lanes coming off the Cross Island Parkway, then there's no reason to not have 2 lanes. I mean, that's where the big squeeze point is during peak hours.
You need to accommodate the lane coming from Gumtree and from the east.
Sorry, can you say that again?
So our modeling was showing that all we needed was 1 lane for each of those, and it was functioning fine with just 1 lane for each, because we took the 2 lanes coming westbound and we dropped those down to 1 lane, the same as dropping the Cross Island down to 1 lane, and then they come into their own lane. There's no merge required. They have their own lane.
Interesting to see it modeled, though. I mean, see what the effect is, because I mean, even with the increase in traffic, you're going to have 50% increase on the Cross Island Parkway. So the critical points are just that merge if you don't have a straight overpass from the Cross Island Parkway.
Yeah, you could keep 2 lanes on the Cross Island, and as they merge, you would have 3 lanes, and then at some point beyond that, drop down to the 2 lanes beyond that point. I mean, there's room to do that.
Mayor,
but our modeling was showing that it wasn't necessary.
It's okay. I just had one question. So the eastbound overpass on the business route, as I look at it, and it's in plan view and there's no elevation, but would that one there, would that be an elevated bypass over the existing overpasses? Okay. So it would be.
Yes. Yes, it would go over the top of that. It's actually at grade at that point.
And do we know
Yes,
how much higher it has to be? I'm sorry. How much higher it has to be for clearance? I'm just trying to get a gauge because I drive that, and then if there's another roadway that's above that bypass, is it another 15 feet higher?
You're going to be, yeah. I mean, it generally bridge clearances are 17, 18 feet plus the thickness of the structure. So, I mean, you're from existing roadway, you're up 20, 22 feet probably to the roadway surface above.
I just wanted to make that point. If you were going off island on the Cross Island, you would have another lane that would be above, tying back into the business route there past Gumtree.
To the grades of each approach on that overpass.
Warren, whenever you calculate the tie-down points, you took that into consideration?
Yeah, we've got plenty of distance to get back down there. Because by the time the way that lays out, by the time you go over that, but then you can immediately start coming back down and be just what you need to get over Gumtree. And then from there, you then taper down to get down to grade beyond Gumtree. Basically, you only have to go that extra height up to get over the Cross Island. Otherwise, you'd stay down lower through the rest of it. And even between Squire Pope and Spanish Wells, if you decided you didn't want the full access at Old Wild Horse, you could even come back down close to existing grade or at the existing grade between those two to reduce the amount of elevated section. But because we're showing a full access there and a bridge at Old Wild Horse, we just figured it would stay elevated instead of going up and back down a lot and making it look like a roller coaster.
I had another question, Nate. Can you explain to the committee and to everybody here to what extent these things have been discussed with SCDOT in terms of viability, in terms of whether they are open to look at these plans, or is it only put together by Lochmuller, in a sense?
It has just been our independent analyses.
No discussions with Craig Wynn, SCDOT?
And I'd like to add that as part of the scope that the committee recommended and approved, the council approved, there was not to be any communication with the county or SCDOT during the engineering evaluation and assessment. That conversation will come out after Lochmuller works with the committee to identify alternatives they think are worthy to advance. And then any design modifications or consideration would then be shared with both the county and SCDOT for consideration at that point.
Yeah, but let's face it. So why not have you have a discussion, Sean, with SCDOT outside of to see whether these things are feasible at all? I mean, if at the end of the day, SCDOT says, excuse me, but you're a bit off the chart here, and we're not going to put the money up, or our engineering expertise doesn't reach any of those issues before we start running down that path.
Well, we will have conversations with both the county and SCDOT, but I don't know yet what we're asking them. We have an alternative that's been presented by the county, and SCDOT as their managing partner has put together this alternative one that this has extended that project area. What I know from what we've heard previously is that any additional property impact within the traditional cultural property area it'd be difficult to get it approved through federal highways, and SCDOT has mentioned that, unless there's significant increase in overall performance of the project. Anything above the funding for the current project is defined by SCDOT or by the county and SCDOT would be a local requirement to find the additional funds to pay for that. So I get a little nervous, not personally, but just as trying to advance feasibility of a project. If it's $50 or $100 million more for one of these alternatives, it appears at this point the additional funding would fall back to the local community to make up that delta. And we already know that the original project cost that was put together based on the deficient bridge, the State Infrastructure Bank grant, and then the referendum leave us at a deficit right now of $100+ million. So that's what I know. There have been communications, but not specifically about having SCDOT vet all of these engineering solutions. That's what we've asked them to come up with.
I understand, but I don't want to belabor the points, but if I were in your shoes, I'd place a call to SCDOT and say, look, this is what we're looking at. Are we off the charts? Is it reasonable? Should we investigate further? I mean,
Sure.
I would seriously consider that.
I would like to have the benefit of the results of this meeting and the position of the committee, and we'll have some additional conversations this week.
The next few slides are ones that Lauren went over at the last meeting. Just wanted to highlight which areas we're speaking of when we're talking about additional right-of-way above and beyond what was within the DOT's, their preferred alternatives. So again, for our alternative one, what we're showing that would be in addition to theirs would be the improvements that we're recommending, as you can see in the northeast quadrant at Gumtree Road, because again, we are looking at Gumtree Road, they did not. So this parcel that you show here would allow us to provide another southbound left turn lane that we're finding would be needed to maintain acceptable intersection operating conditions. Alternative 2 are the bow ties. You can see the widenings that would be required for the roundabouts north and south of Hilton Parkway, in addition to the parcel I just mentioned at Gumtree. Alternative 3 would be what would be required if echelons were constructed either at Squire Pope or Spanish Wells. And again, the improvements at Gumtree. Center turn overpasses, likewise, what would be required at Spanish Wells, Squire Pope, and Gumtree Road. And then alternative 4, again, there's no slide with that because we feel that we could very likely be able to be within SCDOT's proposed right-of-way limits. We would not need any additional right-of-way for the elevated bypasses we have shown.
And Nate, before you go to the next slide, I think it's important to note, because in this evaluation, we've extended the town's project area for study, that the property identified near Gumtree intersection is not within the traditional cultural property. It's not within what the county and SCDOT have defined as the project area. So while there's 0.2 acres of additional impact to town property at the Gumtree, it doesn't increase the impact with through the Stony community. So alternatives 1 and 4 have no additional impact within the Stony community, but alternatives 2 and 3 do.
John? As I mentioned in my introduction, the action items that you all brought for or asked us to prepare for you were just a delineation between the public and private right-of-way parcels for those right-of-ways I just described. So just walking through from left to right, in alternative 1, at point 2 that we referenced before, all of that is within the publicly owned right-of-way. Alternative 2, out of the 1.1 acres that we referenced before, we have 0.74 plus the 0.2 at Gumtree Road. That gives us 0.94 of public right-of-way, 0.16 of private right-of-way. Alternative 3 would be 0.66 plus the 0.2 from Gumtree Road. It was mentioned alternative 1 plus the 0.54 of private right-of-way. That gives us to 1.4 acres of right-of-way that was shown at the last meeting. Took a simple scoring just to show what the or how we scored that based on those results. And then from a cost standpoint, as Dietrich alluded to, yes, we did use Beaufort County's $425 million budget as a base moving forward, but then we really kind of looked at it from a delta standpoint. Lauren evaluated what he felt the increase would be, how much more it would be from that base point. So we had 425 starting alternative 1, 425 million. And then we estimated conservatively that you take $1 million for the improvements at Gumtree. That would be the widening that we showed, some internal intersection improvements that would need to be made that would be within right-of-way, and completely reconstructing all of the signal infrastructure there. Alternative 2, the delta would be approximately $4 million difference between to incorporate the roundabouts as compared to alternative 1. Alternative 3 would be a range of 15 to 25 million more to do. I think echelon is what that reflects. And then alternative 4 was a range of 120 to 150 additional million as compared to the alternative 1. scoring would reflect those are the same scores that you saw last time. And then the construction duration, we felt that that was worth inserting there as well. Looking through the documents for the previous study, they showed that it would take approximately 3 years to construct alternative 1. Found a delta approximately of 2 months if we went with alternative 2. A delta of 6 months compared to alternative 1 if we went with 3. And then alternative 4 was just about another year worth of construction.
Nate, I just for the record, I appreciate the charts and appreciate calculating out the acreage, but you can't add up these rankings. I mean, it just can't add up writer score, cost score, construction, and then rate the whole thing on it. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And I think by doing that, we all we would be embarrassed down the road. It just doesn't work, and I do not understand why you do this. So I think that individually you can compare the right-of-way and the cost score, but can't put a number to it. To me, doesn't make sense. And I think that at the end of the day, when this gets evaluated in the public, we all have egg on our face because this doesn't work unless you can convince me it does.
We're open to any other sort of evaluation, weighting or anything like that. This is just a starting point for the final report. It's really up to the committee to decide how they want to weight each category. So, maybe cost is a lower consideration than right-of-way. Maybe it's a higher, but that can be taken care of with weighting each category and then adding things up. We're definitely open to any suggestions you have on how that weighting would be done.
Just use the same matrix, just don't put in the scores. It doesn't make sense. And same for the other overall scoring matrices. I don't see how you can, especially looking at it from a scientific perspective, how you can do that.
Well, let me jump in. We're trying to help. Diedrich, you're correct in that based on right-of-way impact, they've ranked them from least impact to most impact, from cost from least expensive to most expensive. So the 1, 2, 3, 4 are less relevant than the numbers, right? The comparative assessment between each one of them. I do want to say again, in the scope of work that was approved by the committee and by town council, it had a matrix that was generated initially by the technical working group in an RFP draft that was submitted for consideration. It was a foundation for putting this together, and it asked for a comparative assessment and matrix to evaluate these things. And so it also asked the consultant to consider what was in the matrix or how the matrix was put together, but also if they had a different way that they wanted to represent that evaluation, then it should be up to them to do so. So I think they've given you the information. I'd like the committee's feedback on the right-of-way impact, the cost, the construction duration, and the other elements to know if there's alternatives that just don't make sense from what we're seeing on the screen here.
And Sean, it still doesn't make sense. Okay, you cannot do this. Take it in. You cannot compare apples and oranges. I'm happy with the data. I mean, and we're all intelligent people here. You can make a judgment. You don't have to score it. Scoring it and adding it up is just leading people down the garden path. It just doesn't work. I mean, come on.
From previous project standpoint, those that we shared in our statements of qualifications, this is the methodology that we've used on other projects before. And if looking at the historical data on this specific project, I know that other consultants or even for the DOT, they went with just like red, yellow, green. You know what I mean? So we feel that this provides more weighting, it provides more thought and input toward it.
Nate, again, I appreciate all the data that's in there, but for the record, I disagree with putting a scoring and adding it up and then having people decide based on the lowest or the highest score. It just, to me, it's pulling the wool over people's eyes. Am I
May
the
I
only one here on this?
From my standpoint, this is crystal clear. And I'm coming from someone had 30 years in equipment manufacturer. 15 of those 30 years, I was in charge of the bulldozers for America. And ours would be about the same, sitting down with engineers. We'd have a cost, and then manufacturing engineer would come back and say, it's gonna take us these many months to bring your first product off the assembly line. So you're doing the same thing. So for me, I perfectly understand it. And people that have been in the engineering manufacturing side look at this, even the construction side. Okay, I understand it. So I have no problem with it.
How many apples equal 2 oranges? Tell me.
May I add, Nate, I think you've done an incredible job of trying to, explain our methodology, and I'll just add one more point that maybe would clarify it. We did a lot of work with this committee and internally to determine which alternatives would be viable for the corridor. We didn't present anything to you as a final alternative or include anything in this matrix that did not work. And so if we did not have some sort of comparison between these alternatives for these different categories, the only information we would have provided to this committee would have been, here are 4 options, they all work. And without much more information than that, or comparing them in some way, which we have addressed in this matrix, I personally feel it's a really tough way to make a decision by saying you have 4 options, they're all great, or they all would work. That was the reason why we compared them against one another. So, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, it does not, does not mean that they are, 4 is terrible. Clearly it still works. Otherwise we wouldn't have been presenting this information to you or have it be an alternative that made it this far into the analysis. So Dietrich, you are correct that there is some thought required to analyze the matrix and think about it in that perspective. But again, I wanted to just clarify, we did this to try and provide some context and help aid in making a decision. Just because something is ranked 1, 2, 3, or 4, are they all still generally close to one another? Sure. Some categories, there is a more clear separation between some alternatives, but we felt the comparison was important to be able to make a decision.
So taking into consideration the information as action items, specifically the information that we provided to you all relates specifically to the right-of-way impact row, the second one from the top. This matrix is very similar to what you saw on April the 10th, just starting from the top. Based on the information we've gathered, the tasks that we've completed since our meeting, the traffic operations did not change from what was shown previously. The right-of-way impact, even though we provide you more clarification as to what the delineation, that did not change the rankings. Environmental impacts, safety, bike and pedestrians did not change. I did want to just pause a moment and just, in order to be transparent, the community social impacts, the previous slide that we shared from left to right showed 1, 4, 4, and 3. And in hindsight, that was I think Kate did a great job at the previous meeting describing how we rank these. When something was close to being tied, you can see at the top, like the 1, 3, 3, 4. I won't belabor that in terms of how we graded it, but that should have been, in hindsight, that should have actually been 1, 4, 4, and 2. But then once we realized that, we took just another closer look at the community and social subcategories. And I won't go into great details, but those included relocations, right-of-ways, neighborhoods, environmental justice, cultural resources, and Section 4F resources. And we did find over the last week or so that there was just a little bit of a difference between alternatives 2 and 3. So that's why this slide shows the ranking that it does now with the 1, 3, 4, 2 respectively. The aesthetic score did not change. The cost did not change. We provide you more information, but the overall score did not change. And then we did add the construction duration. So if we use the methodology that let me pull this down. Whereas before, I believe it showed, apologize, I don't have that in front of me, the 19. This is from the last meeting. Previously, it showed 20, 22. Apologize, I don't have that in front with the. I have it here. Sorry about that. The previous slide in April the 10th, it showed 19, 21, 25, and 19. But with adding that change that I spoke about with the community and social impact, and then adding in this second row, you can see how it changed the results when we add these up. And then now the overall ranking in terms of impact would be alternative 1, and then showing that alternatives 2 and 4 have similar scores, and then alternative 3 would remain in the position of 4th.
Nate, how do you, here you have alternative 1, community and social impact. I think it has, how do you get to the 1? Because it has significant impact on Stony, doesn't it? Why? This is what I.
This is in
what I
comparison to the
find
other
so
alternatives.
Concerning is the fact that you add up these numbers, and I am very uncomfortable with adding these numbers up and then coming to a conclusion. That's exactly what I meant. So now you're concluding that one alternative is better over another by just adding up these numbers.
Chad can chime in more, I'm sure, as to the details of how that particular line was arrived at, and the last slide deck certainly went through much greater detail with the specifics into how we came to this conclusion. But to answer your point directly, Dietrich, these scorings were compared to what has already been approved, right? The impacts that have already been deemed okay or acceptable. We did not find an alternative that would generally require less impacts than what has already been designed or considered. And so that's why alternative 1 was scored as a 1, meaning that it generally is within the lines of what has currently been approved. Alternative 2 also generally stays within the lines of what currently has been approved, but has a bit more impact, which is why it was scored as number 2 in this line. And then subsequently, alternative 2 was going to require a little bit more right-of-way outside of what has already been approved. And in this context, right-of-way equals impact to a certain degree. And then alternative 3 required more of those impacts, more right-of-way than the other ones. So that was the lens, the context in which we analyzed this row. There was not a solution that we were able to come up with that addressed all of the other concerns and also took less right-of-way, looking at the corridor holistically. So that's why the scoring was the way it was.
I think you hit it right on the head, Kate. I mean, it was specifically looking at additional direct encroachment on top of what SCDOT was proposing. And so that's how we arrived at the scoring that we're seeing here from a community and social perspective. And again, it's not vetting it through any resource agencies or through the public. That's just looking at it, looking at each alternative and applying some thought behind it as to what this could mean to the community and social environment.
And a score of 1 does not at all insinuate that there will be 0 impacts.
Correct.
Well, I mean, I just find this credibility of that matrix very wobbly, to say the least. And I think I'm just looking at it as a non-traffic person. I think other people will have the same view Plus, I think that still the on-grade alternative bypass should also receive equal attention. And I would like to ask Lochmuller or the town to really give that serious consideration.
So 2 points, just to refresh everyone's memory as to what was included in the last presentation. Chad went over in detail how we came to these scores. So yes, it just says 1, 2, 3, 4, but there's a lot of thought that goes into that. And Chad broke it down per alternative, ecological, social impact. We got results, and then he even went to another degree of then weighting them based on section 106, section 4F, and community and social, providing his own weighting in that to be as conservative as possible. So yes, the results are numbers, but there's a lot of thought and data that's went into that we'll be including in the ultimate report as well that you can pore over. But a lot of detail did go into that. And then Chad, would you, Dietrich brought up the southern or the at-grade bypass option. Could you just take a few minutes and speak to what you have noted in terms of the impacts that would be related to the environmental side of things if something was pursued along the south side of William Hilton Parkway, which is included, it's still within the Stony community?
Sure. So what to keep in mind when we're talking about a bypass lane on the south side of William Hilton Parkway is that this is still, at the end of the day, it's still a South Carolina project that is federalized, meaning it has oversight by Federal Highway Administration, and Federal Highway Administration has to ensure all their policies and rules and guidances are adhered to. And one I will speak to directly here, and it is included in the matrix. Nate, didn't mean to call you Nick there. Nate pointed it out as section 4F. So section 4F deals specifically with the U.S. Department of Transportation Act, and is really focused on not so much public versus private ownership of land, but whether something is in a transportation use or not a transportation use. So what a 4F property is a property district that was found to be eligible or listed on the National Register. That's one type of 4F property. And the second one is a public park that's publicly owned and maintained and accessible to the public. Also trails that are publicly owned and designated for recreational purposes are 4F resources. Wildlife refuges are 4F resource. Section 4 is generally about public recreation resources and then added layer of cultural resources. So cultural resources that are important enough to be considered at least eligible for the National Register. So when you look on the south side of William Hilton Parkway, we have the Stony Traditional Cultural Property. That's a 4F resource. We have the old schoolhouse park there at 152 William Hilton Parkway, which was also considered in the SCDOT's draft EA. And then just on the other side of Jarvis Creek, we have property known as the Honeyhorn Plantation, which was found to be eligible for the National Register at the time Cross Island Parkway was constructed. So right there we have 3 4F resources that would be impacted by a south bypass lane. And again, the general schematics I've seen on this show the conceptual line going through areas that are not designated as transportation use right now. So that would be a conversion from a non-transportation use to a transportation use if SCDOT were to adopt that. That That would require a different level of analysis called an individual section 4F analysis, which in and of itself could require 12 to 18 months just to study and to prove that there's no other alternatives that avoid or minimize impacts to those 4F resources. And that's going to be probably a little bit difficult to prove when SCDOT has the option on the table now that does minimize impacts to those properties. Now, the benefit to alternative 4 that we've put forward, the elevated bypass lane, is that it doesn't add any conversion of those 4F resources because it's all within the existing footprint. What is already SCDOT right away or will become is already accounted for in SCDOT's analysis to date. So that, and I just focused specifically on 4F. I'm happy to drop in the chat here for anyone that wants to look at section 4F in their spare time. I can drop the link to Federal Highways 4F requirements. But that was the big obstacle that I pointed out to Nate. If we were to look at a southern bypass lane, is just the time and the effort, and whether Federal Highway would even approve that, knowing that there are other alternatives that would fulfill the project's purpose and need and minimize impacts to those 4F resources.
I appreciate your comments, and I will look into 4F. But if I take a step back and I look at a 4-lane elevated bypass versus a 1 or 2 lane or 2 or 4 lane on grade bypass, and yes, I would have to go through mostly town-owned property and some tennis courts. You know, where there's a will, there's a way. I mean, let's put that next to your elevated bypass, because it's an alternative that is least cost, least impact on Stony, and it has been communicated with Stony, whereas the elevated bypass has not been communicated with Stony, something that also needs to be done. And it's a quick way to connect people to the Cross Island Parkway, and you avoid all the lights. So to me, it has all these elements in there, and I think if we don't evaluate it, people are going to ask us why we didn't do that. And to me, the issues that you are putting forward in terms of property owned by certain entities, let's put that down on paper and see what it really is. And I think here we are at this point where we need to see that.
At the beginning of the project, at the December meeting, we asked for feedback in terms of maybe what was maybe a higher priority in terms of what we should and should not consider. And at the top of that list was no additional right-of-way, as much as possible, no matter what type of right-of-way that it is, that we should not seek options that pursue significant right-of-way. So if you look at that, yes, that may be town-owned property, but right-of-way is right-of-way, and that's still considered within the Stony traditional cultural property. I know a lot of people are focusing on the north side, but that's still on the south side. That is traditional cultural property. And then from a benefit standpoint, in terms of the operations, we feel that this addresses that, as well as it fixes the operating conditions at Gumtree Road. And then Lauren, too, you'd mentioned the concerns with the connecting directly to the Cross Island on the south side as well, difficulties that be posed by that?
Well, my main concern with a bypass down there is, even though you're viewing that as being able to be free flow, but you still have parcels that would be south of that bypass that have to have access. So you're still going to have some at-grade access on that bypass, or you're going to have to be elevated to allow them to go underneath.
Did you mention too, Sean, the relocations as well, at least?
And in addition to that, I mean, I've looked at the parcel map, and I don't see any way you can get through there without impacting a private-owned parcel. there's several privately owned parcels scattered around through there that would make it very difficult to get through without impacting one or more of them, which then is additional right-of-way of private property. And just a rough estimate based on that length, you're looking at probably a total additional right-of-way acreage of maybe 6 acres to create a 60-foot wide right-of-way through there.
Hey, do you
Lauren,
know-
would that be 6 acres on top of the four some acres that's already proposed from Stony?
Yes, it will be additional.
Yeah, okay.
Nate, if I may,
Well, you might be able to reduce some of the you might be able to reduce some of what they were proposed to be taking because you wouldn't need as much widening, but I don't think you would offset all of it. We'd have to look at it in more detail.
Go ahead, Charles.
yeah, I have a question about the Stony area. As you come out of, as you get across Jenkins Island, it turns into 5 lanes of concrete there. What is the actual width of that right of way through that area?
I'm sorry, I don't know if I understand your question, Charles.
Are we talking on Jenkins Island?
Yeah, no, when you get off of Jenkins Island and you're on to Hilton Head Island, what is the width of the right of way as you go through the 6 lanes or 5 lanes of concrete pavement that are in the Stony area? As soon as you approach and go into that Stony area, what is the right of way there? What is the actual
Current right away.
current right of way? Right.
Lauren,
Distance.
Lauren, would you be able to go into your file and just see if you could do the
Yeah,
measurement?
let me see if I can. It varies through there, but
Lauren, I think it's between 100 feet and 115 feet.
yeah, that's what it looks like. It's around 100 to 115 feet currently.
So 6 lanes of pavement, 72 feet. I'm just saying, coming off of the bridge, widen that area, through that area. Direction, and then when you widen out to the, what is it, the Squire Pope area, it actually goes to, there's an extra lane there. Some of that I think should be looked at also. I don't know why, you haven't, I don't think you've done that, have you? Looked at grade work. In other words, other than other than alternative 1, which
Yeah. So alternative 1 is all that grade work. And you're absolutely right. It's a great question. There is right of way there today that is wider than the current road cross section. And most of the roadway improvements needed or proposed could fit within that right of way. There's an opportunity to look at some design modifications. Some have already been requested by council in an MOU with the county to reduce 2 lanes on each side from 12 feet to 11 feet. Right, there's 4 feet of additional savings. Potential movement of a left turn lane in the median to shift some width needed in Stony. And then there's 2 left turn lanes from Hilton Parkway onto Squire Pope. And there's 2 right turn lanes from Squire Pope Road back going westbound onto US 278 or Hilton Parkway that could also potentially be reduced to reduce some of that impact. And so right now I'm looking at the updated property right-of-way property impact map and information that's part of the EA. It was updated in January. I shared it with the committee, but there's a total of 3.4 acres of property needed to execute what the county is currently proposed with Beaufort County. Of that 3.4 acres, 2.19 are publicly owned, and 1.21 acres are privately owned. So when we talk about the 4F resource and the traditional cultural property, right now there's an option that is only impacted, it's impacted 3.4 acres, right? Is there an opportunity for the current alternative that's being proposed to have less impact by making sure you're utilizing the right of way that's there, by looking at fewer, less than 2 left turns and making some design considerations? There's potentially ways to save some impact to both public and private property and reduce that overall 3.4 to something less. When we talk about a horizontal bypass, and I've looked at the potential connections, again, no matter what, when you tie back in to William Hilton Parkway or the Cross Island, there has to be some elevation to tie back in there, right? So there's going to be costs there. But when I look at the private properties that are located along the southern side of William Hilton Parkway as you come on island, there are between 5 and 9 private properties that could be impacted with the horizontal bypass south of William Hilton Parkway. Yes, the town owns or property is publicly owned, a significant portion on that side, but not all of it. And so there's not a way to run a horizontal bypass without adding additional right-of-way. And I hear that if that happens, it's less impactful on the Stony community. But when we look at the total amount of property needed to execute that alternative, it's significantly more. It's 3.4 now. It's more than that. It sounds like Lauren mentioned 6 plus whatever is needed, even in a reduced footprint for the current corridor.
What's for that grade of a bypass?
Correct.
To do a simple widening of the road, it seems like there's enough.
Yeah, based on what's proposed, there currently isn't, unless there are some design modifications that are made. But I think you could get very close. It just depends on the result of that determination.
Addressed and understood.
Okay. Bridges.
For the rehabilitation versus a retrofit. We received a copy of the seismic study last week, and we've going through that with our structural engineers right now. But my cursory review of it, I'm allowing them because I am not a structural engineer. But some of the key findings I know that they did share, I mentioned at the last meeting, was it wasn't feasible. When I was going through it, it was the fact that the liquefaction potential of the soil beyond the FEE and the SEE categories of an earthquake, that there could not be any financially feasible way to make it SEE rated, whereas a brand new bridge, they could. You couldn't retrofit an existing bridge to meet SEE requirements. So that's a big thing that took away from me. And then
Suggested that be a temporary solution. Widen those existing bridges. Repair the one that's deficient. Temporary solutions until southern crossing is.
But then talking about the southern, the second bridge would be, 15 to 20 years at best.
Right,
and then if it's,
Right.
I think at the original review of that, they are 40 years old at the beginning of the study, and then now it's probably getting to be 50. And then if they retrofit it, potentially another 35 at best. So that's something we can document once our structural engineers are able to look at that in more detail. But we did receive a seismic study earlier last week.
So you're in this process of reviewing.
Correct.
By the way, I won't be here at the 8th. I won't be here. I'll be out.
So at the last committee meeting, when Lockmiller presented their evaluation and comparative assessment of the alternatives, the goal was to identify an alternative that was, that would be the preferred alternative to put in the VisSim model so that they could then do the deeper level of analysis and evaluation, because VisSim has greater capability than Synchro. And with that, they could move beyond the current study area as well to look at the full end-to-end that was requested all the way down to Sea Pine Circle and to Wilborn Indigo Run. And so what they presented today is the additional information requested plus some information on construction duration, and would like the committee to weigh in on alternative or alternatives that we need to continue to move forward and advance. And so I'd like to hear, the committee's input and feedback at this time.
I think my vote still stays the same. I think the bridge, the overpass, is going to get people from point A to point B, or then is going to cross the bridge to Sea Pines, the quickest, the safest, most efficient, most effective. Definitely eliminates the left-hand turns, which I have a great dislike for. And as I mentioned, traveling globally, I have seen some overpasses, viaducts, whatever you want to call them, that you have to stop and look to see that they're there. And I think with some creative ideas, we could have an overpass that is the best of the best. So it's the bow ties, number 2, the overpass, number 1.
I haven't made up my mind, and I think that maybe it's a combination of all of the above. I think that we need to see the on-grade bypass south of 278 with its issues, apparently, but I want to run the simulation on that particular bypass. I think we have so many unanswered questions on these things that I can't make a judgment on whether I like alternative 2, 3, or 4. So I'm not there yet. And I think maybe the next meeting we can get some answers on some of the issues that were brought out, and have a simulation on a 5th alternative, really, on-grade bypass.
After hearing what I've heard this today, actually, I'm tending to go with alternate 1, providing that the bridge is not 11 lanes or the equivalent of 11 lanes. That be pared back as a means of reality, actually. I can see 3 and a breakdown lane on each one, which could be used in peak times, perhaps, as traffic lights up where you want, green, shoulder side. I asked at the last meeting, was there a pedestrian survey done, or a bicycle survey that shows the amount of pedestrian or bicycle traffic that comes from Bluffton into Hilton? I don't recall that we were that specific about that. I don't know if we need a bike lane on that new bridge. That's what their plan is.
Yeah, if I could jump in on that. So there was a previous committee that was assembled. I think they had somewhere between 20 and 25 meetings to get input. They adopted guiding principles, and then provided input and recommendations to council, one of which was to add bike and ped facilities from the corridor. Right now, occasionally I see somebody walking or biking on the bridge, but, I see commuting every once in a while, someone walking or biking, but along inside the Jersey barrier in the shoulder. And so as it relates to the 11-lane bridge, right now as proposed, it's 3 lanes in each direction. There is one breakdown lane on the outside of each direction. And on the inside where they were proposing 10-foot breakdown lanes on both sides, there's been a reduction in the inside breakdown lanes to something less. I think it's 6 feet on each side. So there's been 8 feet of savings there on that side. But as far as the bike and ped facility, there is one planned as part of the project, 12 feet wide, on the southern side of the bridge. Recommendations that came forward with that other citizen advisory committee were to include that. Beaufort County adopted the Beaufort County Connects plan to increase multimodal connectivity and bike and peds throughout the county. And in that plan, they recommended connecting Hilton Head to the mainland with bike and peds. So that is part of it and in the current alternative.
Go to Indigo Run. I mean, overpass done. I still think we're gonna have a traffic problem.
Okay. So I've actually been looking at alternate number 2 as a standpoint of for the VISA model. It's kind of in between. It'll give us a basis so we can see how it will work. We know, I would expect anyway, that we would see that alternate 3 or 4 would also probably work better than 2 and 1. But I think alternate 2 will give us a picture of how well it could work. And that's kind of the way I'm looking at it. I appreciate the explanations on the F4 properties, and obviously y'all have done your work and understand what it would take to do something else on those properties, and it's not feasible. So I accept that explanation. So that's where I am.
Okay.
So we've got 2 for 3 and the other 2 and not answering.
Yeah, I've heard 1-1, 1-2, and 2 4s at this point.
Can we confirm that, in the next meeting, that Lochmuller will, even if it is a brief look at a grade bypass, I think we are otherwise leaving an opportunity to really look at a realistic solution on the side, and I think that's not a good thing. We haven't really talked about public transportation either. I mean, is that something that's going to be addressed as well, or those 2 things?
Part of the deliverable for task 1 was providing including the transit factor of that. And based on our research, we're preparing our findings with that right now. But our understanding is that Kate mentioned at a previous meeting that there would need to be a reduction of approximately 30% of the existing traffic across the bridge to be able to maintain 4 lanes across. With 2045, it's about 40%. We've had our transit experts in-house look at the existing system, and right now, probably the best case, in his opinion, would be that you could, if everything was working optimally, because there is an existing system now in place, it's, approximately maybe like 2%. I know that there's been discussions about previous consultants thinking, 5 as the best case. So even if you took the conservative approach of a 5% reduction, that nowhere near reaches that 30% reduction. So we do think those transportation demand management strategies are good and are beneficial, but they being a standalone option in order to maintain a 4-lane bridge across the way just isn't practical, in our opinion.
I know that I might seem to give you a hard time, but I
Very
just want to be critical and constructive. And I think you guys have done an enormous amount of work. We've been looking at this for the last 4 years, and so we have thought things through. And that's why I've sort of brought out these points, and I appreciate your attention to it. Thanks.
I'd also just like to say that, we're talking about an increase already to, $425 million. What is the likelihood, and I'm not asking you this question, I'm just making it as a statement, that the state infrastructure bank or the state house or anybody in Columbia would give us the additional funding to do anything additional? It's very possible they may come back to us and say, that's what you want, it's your dime, you pay for it, you do it. So, there's conversations that are going to be had with the state infrastructure bank soon to understand where the additional funding's coming from, what they're willing to do, how they're willing to fund this. So those are forthcoming. So I look at, these options, and that's another reason why I choose 2, is because it's more in line cost-wise. So that's also why I go there.
Yeah, and I did want to point out, when I did the math, there's about $140 million shortfall on one based on what the current funding is. When you get to alternative 4, the bypass is somewhere between 266 and 295 million of a shortfall. And when I look at the property impact, it looked like it was 0.2 acres in alternative 1, but it was outside of Stony. It was Gumtree and it was all publicly owned. An alternative, it looked like it was roughly 0, whatever. We thought it was about 0. So 1 and 4 don't have any impact or additional impact in Stony based on what I'm looking at. But when you look at the price, it's another 120 to 150 million on alternative 4. So if price is no object, then I understand, but I don't know the likelihood of trying to get another 260 to 295 million on top of what we've already got. So I don't know if that impacts anyone's, evaluation. But we would like, it's very difficult to go to the VisSim with 4 or 5 different alternatives because it's really time intensive. And then when you evaluate the intersection options between each one, we'll be at this an awful long time. And in our current contract, we have the ability to model through VisSim a preferred alternative to get those end-to-end impacts. So I would need a contract addendum, and I'm trying to move through this and get you information that you need, but also let Lockmuir, as the independent professionals here, tell us what they think is the best alternative, what they believe is the best solution. Because if we don't let them do that in an independent manner, we'll be evaluating many different options for a very long time.
Everybody's still sticking with their choices? So based off of that, and we've got 2 that are for alternative 3 to run the VisSim on.
My thought on the bow tie, that's almost like a short-term solution as traffic. And I equate it to, okay, I hurt my knee, I go to the doctor, he says therapy when really I should have surgery. And so I'm thinking the bow tie is a quick therapy, might get us 5-10 years down the road, and then the next group is looking at more traffic. And I'm just thinking further ahead than maybe I should. Number 1, number 2 is my fallback.
Last but not least, I am just very wary about making that determination. I think we're not there. Sorry. That's too many unanswered things, and especially the on-grade bypass. I mean, it's a very viable option. And I would like it to be evaluated. Or I make a choice of what's, plus all the other issues I mentioned, so to me, it's premature.
Nate, or Sean, in the on-grade bypass, there's wetlands, right?
Chad, do you have that map? I know that's something that we looked at as
There
well.
would have to be, because you'd have to cross the creek to the east of Spanish Wells.
Wait, what are we talking
Right.
about? Are we talking about the elevated
Well,
bypass? or-
a southern bypass.
Yes, yeah, there's estuarine wetlands there associated with Jarvis Creek. You'd be spanning most of those, so your impacts would be limited to probably wherever your peers are going. But yeah, there would still be wetland impacts there as well, and stream impacts.
So from my sources in the construction industry, they tell me 5 to 7 year minimum to get approval to build a new road through wetlands. So we're putting 5 to 7 years down the road. If we're going to keep it at grade, we have to dig out the wetlands down to firm material. That is going to be expensive. So as cha-ching, cha-ching, the bank keeps going up. I don't think with the land that Sean talked about, I just don't see it's a viable alternative. I understand people want it that way, but I'm not feeling it.
Well, I understand your comments, Ed, but let's take stock of what it takes, not just throw it out.
Let me offer one thing because it was brought up earlier. At the beginning of this process, this was meant to be independent without discussion with SCDOT and the county. But I'm happy to test the alternatives that we now have in front and our public record with the county and the SCDOT. If they don't believe if they don't believe an alternative or two are feasible, or there would not be an opportunity to advance, then I'd like to get that information to help narrow down the alternatives that are still in play.
I think we have to do that now. You've gotten this far without having had the conversation with DOT, but these are way outside of the realm of what was discussed, right? And outside of their choice. And if they just come back and say, no, it's your dime, period, then that is a driver, real driver.
But let's find out. I mean,
That's what I'm saying.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So have a discussion, with
do
DOT, with the county, with everybody that's involved, and take stock and see what the possibilities are. But let's not just assume or think about things that may or may not happen.
I absolutely will. With the committee's support, then we'll make sure to do that.
Yeah, I mean,
It'd be a smart move.
we said in the very beginning that no communication with the county, no communication with DOT, keep them out of it. But I think we're far enough along now that we could ask the question, because we want it to be independent. We want it to be trustworthy. So.
One thing is being independent. The other thing is being smart about it. And you have your channels to DOT and other people, and you can bounce it off them and see whether certain things are possible and certain things aren't.
Message received. We'll make sure that happens very quickly.
Yep. Do that and just get back to us, and see if it changes anybody's opinions. What we want to see the VISM on. Sure. Okay. Anything else? Comments or questions? Parents by citizens. Parents by citizens. Anybody? Come on up.
Okay, I'll go first. Thanks for all of this. I want to make 2 quick points. First of all, I just found out on Saturday night from personal experiences that the 2 lights are not synchronized or optimized. Waited at Spanish Wells for traffic passed, red light at Spanish Wells, and the last car went by, and there was at least another 15 to 20 seconds before the light turned yellow and then turned red. So that's not really optimized. And then we went at Spanish Wells and got within about, 300 yards of, or 300 feet of Squire Pope, and it turned red. So, if you're making studies and think that we already have the synchronized, optimized lights, it ain't happening. So that's just one point. Second of all, there's something that I did bring up and mention a couple of meetings ago, but it's the cost value for benefit gained. And that is, according to Lockmiller's figures, a grand total of 1.82 minutes, expending all of this 425 million, a total of 1.82 minutes is saved in the morning commute and 4.6 minutes at the afternoon commute. So that's a total of 6 minutes and 42 seconds. I calculated out that each minute saved computes to $355,140 per minute saved. And that's the least. That's the alternative one. So is this really what Hilton Head Island residents want to spend their tax dollars on? I'm thinking, that maybe even looking at some of the lesser costs, like Charlie's proposal of maybe just adding lanes onto existing bridges, and maybe that one old bridge needs to be 86th and replaced. But I think maybe $66 million per minute saved on the total commutes is a little excessive, and maybe we might want to continue to look for other alternatives that don't cost as much. Thank you.
Christopher Cliff. Since November 2018, I've attended 32 committee meetings that chaired by David Johnson. I listened and tuned in to, I think, something like a dozen joint broadcasts of Beaufort County and the town. I've attended, I don't know how many council meetings at which this bridge has been discussed. And at no time during all of those meetings, until very recently, has cost come up as a determining factor. So is something sinister going on that we don't know about? And when you look at the matrix that Lockmiller have provided, setting aside the intellectual question of whether they're reasonable or not, if you take out cost, then alternative 4 is extremely competitive. And where on earth they got the construction duration from, goodness only knows, because STD-TOT don't have the world's best record. And Craig Wynne said it would take 3 years to construct. And when I asked him how he measured it, he said, well, I can talk to you that outside. Now, Craig Wynne made it quite clear in the second meeting of David Johnson's committee that there were certain aspects of the bridge that would be for the town to pay, not SCDOT. Now, where does this pedestrian cycle path come from? It came from our resident sponsor of cycle paths. And he said, look at Ravenel. They've got this wonderful side track there. I go over Ravenel a couple of times a month. And you see lots of young people using it and cyclists, and it goes from one residential community to another residential community. This thing goes from nowhere to nowhere. Now, MKAS, the lead consultant, I'm sure you can remember this, said at the council meeting when they're discussing the width of this bridge, this is absurd. This bridge is so far away from sizable residential communities, you're going to need a trailhead. And at the moment, it's going to go from nowhere to nowhere. You really don't need this. That's on record. I'm sure you'll find it. So what else have you got? So when we look at the matrix, we see in here a cost, and it's considered to be a differential. Now, we all know that the 425 million was the last figure SCDOT came up with in 2022. Okay? Now, they never explained publicly how they arrived at the 425, but we all know there's well over 100 million shortfall. Now, Nate's people have come up with their own figures. I just want to ask the question, are you comparing current money with old money, or have you actually costed the incremental cost based on 22 numbers?
We got 3 minutes is up. I know it goes fast.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I mean, it's very important because this matrix, the information in this, none of it's absolute. A lot of it's subjective, and the SCDOT have actually been burdened with a task which they didn't set out. Craig Wimney came, laid out his objectives and said quite clearly it was to fix Mackey Creek. So we brought this on ourselves.
Thank you. Other public comments? Yes, sir.
Richard Busy, Indigo Run. At one of your recent meetings, I made this point that we need a fair, transparent, and independent analysis, independent of all political manipulation. Unfortunately, that has not been the case. The impact on the Stony community has been downplayed. Citizen questions have been ignored. A questionable weighting system has been used. A better alternative has been disregarded. And the town's, some would call it manipulation, of the consultant has made the DOT plan the best choice with a minor tweak. And all this, keep in mind, Mr. Warner talked about cost. We have spent an estimated $1 million in taxpayer money thus far on the consultant and town hall staff time. Keep in mind that this committee does not have, I know this doesn't seem to bother anyone, but does not have a legitimate chair. Mayor Perry elected himself and has kept committee members from making legitimate motions. And yet he's the one who has proclaimed that we will leave no stone unturned and that it was critical to preserve the character of our island. Unfortunately, none of this has happened. Too much attention is being placed on an oversized bridge and not enough on our traffic lights, which are the real cause of our congestion problems. A DOT solution that now costs $425 million a year and saves 109 seconds in one direction and 276 seconds in the other. A DOT solution that produces a monstrosity, 11-lane bridge and 2 huge new ugly intersections on Hilton Head. Is that the character of the island that we want? Options that may be better, cheaper, with less community impact have been suggested by the technical working group and would be less harsh on the Gullah community, such as a horizontal bypass to the Cross Island Parkway, have been ignored. After 4 years of delay caused by the county, rushing now to approve a bad plan would be a disaster for our town. The town's decision on this issue will be one of the most consequential decisions in years and will impact our island for decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm Louise Miller Cohen. I'm a native of Hilton Head Island, and I have a job to do. And that job was assigned to me by God. And that is to keep our Gullah Geechee culture alive on Hilton Head Island. It is so very important. My ancestors were slaves brought from Africa here to America, work for 400 years without any pay. And when they could have gotten paid, they got the lease. What was promised to them, 40 acres and a mule, never happened. But they were not discouraged. God still gave them a desire to have land left here on Hilton Head Island for their descendants. And they were only doing what God said to do. Proverbs 13:22 say, a good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children. If it had not been for them thinking about us, we would not be on Hilton Head Island today. All we have is the land that was purchased by our ancestors and passed down to us. The land is so very important to us because, like I say many times, a lot of y'all in this room, if something happened on Hilton Head Island, and you don't want to stay here any longer, you can pull up sticks and go back home. We can't do that. This is home. So the land is very, very important to us because this is all we have. So I'm grateful to everyone in this room who feel our pain, who know that we are human beings just like you are. If you hit us, we hurt. If you cut us, we bleed, just like you. Okay, God just happened to put us in these dark-skinned bodies. We are not responsible for being black here in America. God put us in these bodies. But he made us, he knew what he was doing. He intended for his garden to have roses of all colors. Okay? So what I'm asking you, put yourself in our place. Suppose this was happening to you. If this was in a white community, we wouldn't even been here today because this would not be happening. But since it seemed like we in the black community, we always are the one to be stepped on. And I know some people in this room feel that if you didn't feel it, you wouldn't be here. And I thank every one of you. But again, I'm saying, please help us to keep our land, keep our culture, and keep this community. This is all we have. And just remember now, if you go along with what is wrong, the word of God said you're going to reap what you sow. So it might not be today, but it's coming. If not to you, to your next generation and the next one. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Other public comments? All right, seeing none, we'll come back. And any new business? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you all.